You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
Welcome to Trek FM's local watering hole. I am just one of your hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and this week, Christy, are you there? Are you...
Hello?
I didn't... Yeah. Oh, wait. So, I'm sorry. Time just seemed to stop for a moment, and I didn't know if you were there or not, and I didn't know if you were just frozen on Zoom or frozen in time.
Yeah, no, I got caught in one of those time freezes and thrown up in the air and lost my wings somewhere.
Ugh, man, that's the worst. Humans are the worst, right?
Mm-hmm. You got that right, Diggums.
Oh, man. Well, today we're going to talk about something that has come out that's new. It was supposed to come out in theaters, and then, of course, it passed its release date, and Disney decided to put it on its streaming service, Disney+. And so we're going to talk about Artemis Fowl tonight. And so... I am excited, though. It was kind of nice just to watch something that I've never seen before.
Same here.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've done that. So, well, before we dive into talking about the movie, of course, people can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're over on Apple Podcasts, please do give us a star rating and review. Help people find the show. It's definitely... The best way to help out a podcast is give them a review or share us on social media. You can find us at Trek FM or on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. You can also find us online at Trek FM, where we have a contact section, and you can send any thoughts to Christy and I that way if you'd like to shoot us an email. And especially in this time when movies, keep getting pushed back and stuff, maybe there's something you'd like to have us talk about. So, we'd love to hear from you and see what is, what are the things that you're watching? What are the things that maybe we haven't ever talked about on the show? So that would be really fun. So, Christy, I was really interested in this because before today, as of the recording, I had never read the book series, and I only knew about Artemis Fowl because I worked at a Barnes & Noble. I ran the kids department. I was very familiar with the Artemis Fowl books because, they were very popular. I think they've sold like over 9 million copies, so it's a very popular series for kids. And so I just wondered what your familiarity, if you had ever read the books at all, and if you, like when this was coming out, this is something that you were excited about at all.
That's the weird thing. I actually didn't hear anything about the series and whatnot until I actually saw that the film was coming out on Disney+. So I don't know how I didn't hear about it because I used to visit Barnes & Noble all the time, actually. But I missed it somehow. So I saw it come up on Disney Plus and thought, that seems interesting. And I read the premise and actually sat down and watched it. So, I have not read the books, and this is my first time seeing the story at all.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, sometimes... you kind of get into a group and you just feel like everybody knows something, Mm-hmm. So I just assumed that everybody kind of knew the story, or not the story, but just about the book series itself. But, it's one of those things where, unless you probably grew up in a certain generation, it's just a book series that you might have missed because it might not have been as popular at the time, when you're a kid. So, mm-hmm. And then too, this was easy to miss. The trailers were playing in theaters a little bit the last time I went to the theater, which I think the last time that happened might have been Onward. And so I think I saw the Artemis Fowl trailer then, but, and then of course this whole pandemic thing happens and they they decide to just put it on Disney Plus. And in fact, what's interesting, I thought, was they didn't even go with the direct-to-home video, basically, route of, you could pay, like, maybe $19, what they do with some of the movies like that. I was kind of surprised that they didn't even do that.
Yeah, I actually was as well, because I just thought immediately you have a budget to keep up. So how are you going to make your money back on that and turn any kind of profit if you're not doing something like that, since you can't do a theater release? But here we are.
Yeah, I wonder if, the thought process was that it helps with subscriptions for Disney Plus, right? We continue to put new content on there, especially as we're going through this pandemic, and more and more people continue to subscribe. So I'm wondering if that was their thought, so they can make some of the money back that way. And I'm sure, they'll put it on, home video release, in the sense of, like, you could buy it on Blu-ray or 4K and whatnot, and when they do. But I think some of the answers might come as we just talk about through the movie, is maybe why they didn't go that direction, because I do think there are some clues that I get through watching the movie as to why they might not have gone that route. But it's really interesting, because this movie itself had a really long development. Like, it kind of languishes around in development hell for a really long time. I mean, all the way back to 2001, this long development starts with this plans announced to adapt the series. Colfer, who is the author, actually started on the screenplay, but even he's kind of skeptical that it might happen, and that was in 2003. Then it's not till 2013 that Walt Disney Pictures picks it up, and they said they were going to be covering the events of the first and the second books together. And then it's not really till 2015 where Kenneth Branagh is actually hired to direct this. And then that's in conjunction with, the Weinstein Company. And, of course, that goes pretty badly, in the sense that once the film is going to be released, Disney terminates its production with them because of everything that happens with Harvey Weinstein. And also, like, this movie has just had a really hard time getting to the theater in the first place, and it never gets there. Like, its development never allows it to actually get into the theater.
Which, I mean, I'm sure, as you know, if any history of screenplays in general, there are so many that just end up either in development hell like this, or just never even get to development. So, I mean, it's lucky it got as far as it did. But I do think it's kind of sad that it goes this route with the success that the books saw.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And since you haven't read the books and I've only read the first one, I mean, I can say that there is a significant change in, like, the tone of the story and the type of story they tell. And the author himself has said that he supports the changes from the source material, but having read the first book and watched the movie, I understand why I did some, like, reading and stuff of, what fans have thought of this, and most of them are very unhappy with the way in which the storyline has been changed, and also just some of the choices they made, even with some of the casting, I mean, they really do change the tone, and so, the setup for the book series is that Artemis Fowl comes from a long history of his family being, criminal geniuses, criminal masterminds. And that's what he is as well. And like, he's 12, but he's basically, Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes wrapped into one. He's that smart. And so, the movie itself really, it plays this much more, and I would say this, I can understand why people who read the book series are kind of upset, because like a lot of things that Disney has done, is it really Disneyified the story, where it makes things much more, it makes things less morally ambiguous, because in the book, he's pretty morally ambiguous as a character, Artemis Fowl, this 12-year-old, because he is literally a criminal mastermind who, he is trying to actually extort money from the fairies. That's why he captures Holly. Whereas, of course, the story they concoct for the movie makes things seem much more palatable to the fact that he's actually has an altruistic reason for doing this. And so that really changes things. And I think I can understand then, after all of this development, why fans would see this and not quite be as happy and be frustrated in many ways, the same way that lots of books get adapted, and fans are just like, if you had just stuck to the source material.
Yeah, I actually read that in the, different comments that other viewers had made about the movie, that it went that route. And I was surprised to see that the original storyline dealt with his family fortune instead of this more G-rated plot line. So I totally understand that what you're saying is the Disney-fied version of it. And that for me also, it was clear that no one was ever in really any mortal danger. I think that the stakes aren't high enough throughout the movie version of the story for you to worry about anybody. Because, even the one character that we almost lose, Dom, gets revived by Holly Short. So you're like,
right.
Okay, well, you immediately ruined any kind of weight you had to that moment. And then he gets his father back, and then everything's tied up in a nice little bow.
Right. Well, and what's fascinating, too, about the book is that's actually much more of a surprise in the book, because at that point, the character of Holly kind of hates Artemis, because they've been playing this back and forth game of trying to outsmart one another in the fact that, he's captured her and everything. And so again, that comes as much more of a shock to see her make that turn to try and start helping them instead of, be on the other side. And so, and part of that is because, Artemis has been, a criminal mastermind. And also what's fascinating too is in the book, his mom is still alive. And it's, and she has, mentally been deteriorating ever since her husband disappeared. And it's been like over a year, and it just keeps getting worse and worse as she kind of tumbles farther and farther into depression. And so, to spoil it, sorry if you haven't read the book, but for anyone who's listening, but the end of the story, you get the sense that Artemis has not only been doing this for fortune, but there seems to be no way to help his mother, and in the end, you get the sense that he gives back some of the money for Holly, and she heals his mother with magic.
Okay.
And so, it's not just been about the money in the end, but it's much more subtle. Just everything's, that whole part of the story is very subtle in the book, but it's really great. So, again, completely can understand why, people would be disappointed. And after reading the book, I can't help but feel that myself, is that I do think Disney missteps with the movie by not allowing the source material to just speak for itself, because the storyline, too, is actually perfectly made to make a series of movies in. It's very episodic, except that it's also going to, connect. And, in many ways, it kind of feels like a James Bond type of thing with kids, and so that's always fun. So, yeah, it's just fascinating to me that they make that choice. And so, now, one of the things that just watching the movie, and from this point on, we'll just be talking specifically about the movie and what it gives us. But I always enjoy stories where fairy tales are true, you know, and it's kind of like hidden. And so, how did you feel like that they did with the world building in the movie here? As especially since you're not familiar with the book at all, and I wasn't when I was watching the movie either. So I was going in completely blind.
I think that the initial premise and start of the movie was really interesting, especially since I already love fantasy stories, and like you were saying, Matt, the telling of all of the things that you thought were just fairy tales in the past are actually true. I like that idea. I was already hooked in to watch it because of that, but I feel like they kind of falter a little bit with pulling off how they get there. Because it starts out as feeling like it's this family story, and it's going to be maybe kind of a Men in Black almost situation, but with a kid, or a heist or something. And then suddenly we're underground and seeing all of the fairy world, and they tell you why it should make sense, but it's all in the dialogue. It's not as much showing you the literal connections of why they're so interconnected, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think the movie does a decent job at the beginning, like you're saying. Like I feel like that's it did a pretty decent job of pulling me in, with having Josh Gad's character, kind of set out the story for us, Diggum's, giving the story to you. I thought that was kind of fun, and I think one of the things that I noticed throughout the movie is that it just all seems to go by really quickly. This is a movie that's only an hour and a half. And so I think one of the things that I realized about the movie is that I felt like we needed another 30 minutes of the movie so you could really help expand and explain a lot of the things that we're seeing. I think, they kind of rush past so much stuff where I'm not, if I'm just being dumped into this world and I have not read the book, I don't know what these police officers are really that much, other than my understanding of like just the general idea of police in my mind. The connections of that with the fairy world, with the world above, of the human world, and all of that, and yeah, I feel like, that the world building itself, when you're throwing somebody into a new story and a new world with all of its own rules, you need to be able to spend more time to set that up.
Yes.
And to allow people to feel comfortable. And I never it's not like I never didn't understand anything that was going on, but I don't always completely feel comfortable in even just the rules of the world and how it all works. Because, unlike a book where the author can stop and explain something to you, the movie just keeps going.
Right. Yeah. I mean, case in point right there, when you mention rules, I immediately think of them talking about the fairy rules and how he has to invite them in like vampires or something. And they never explain why there are rules, what the rules are, other than apparently you have to invite them and state what the rules are, maybe. It's very unclear. And then they don't really explain why the tree matters. Other than, that's where the fairy that came up to the surface would often go. It seems like they're trying to show that the tree itself is sort of interconnected with the fairy world as well by underground, but they never really explain that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And honestly, your confusion makes complete sense. I mean, now that I've read the first book, it makes a lot more sense because he explains all that,
Right.
like that's a part of the story. The tree is specifically a part of the story.
Or what the ocula is actually for.
Right, exactly, which, spoiler alert, is not part of the first book whatsoever. So, and I don't know if it's a part of the rest of the series at all because I haven't read it yet. But so I'm only speaking from that experience of having read the first book. But no, absolutely, like that's a great example, Christy, of just like where they just don't explain the rules. Like you're talking about these rules of fairies and where they can enter and how they can enter a human residence and what that all means and the why of that is not explained at all. And unfortunately, too, they don't really explain it in the way, like that whole scene at the beginning where she's taking down the troll is a big part where you first start to learn about the fairy rules in the book and where they come from, but they don't do that in the movie. And so then they start spouting these rules at you as if you're supposed to know them.
Right.
Which, again, if you've read the book, you'd know. But
for those of us that haven't, we're going, oh, there's a time freeze.
Exactly. Which, having walked through on Owlpost with Drea, most of Harry Potter now, there are plenty of times when I have complained about the movies, and I did that on the episodes here we did in the 602 Club with Harry Potter. It's like that there are many times the movies took for granted that everybody watching them had read the book. And it's like, that doesn't really make sense as a movie if you haven't read the story. And I think this is one of the places where I came into it not having read the source material. I don't have really a connection with the source material. And so for the world building, especially when you're throwing in this mythology and using all those things, it's like you really need to set what your rules of your version of mythology are. And again, Colfer in his books really does a great job of explaining a lot of that. But the movie, it almost felt like the movie needed like maybe a prologue too to help with the world building, like almost Lord of the Rings style prologue, just to help us be introduced to the world.
Yeah, well, and it makes you care more than when they do introduce the rules, because you're even thinking to yourself, okay, well, if the fairies do enter the home without being invited, or they do kill him to then get in, what happens to them? So there's just kind of these open questions that they don't answer in the film that make you not care as much about what's going on in the scene.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, if I don't understand the rules as a watcher of a film, then I'm absolutely not going to care as much, because it's like if the story doesn't feel like it's important enough for me to understand the world building, then why should I care?
Right. Like, why do you continue on the journey with the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point, and I think it's not just movies that are made from a previous source. I think there are just movies in general that do that, where they don't give you enough of understanding of the world that you're watching to care enough. It's like you don't take yourself enough seriously. As a watcher, I can't take you seriously.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that's really interesting. Now, I will say, Ferdia Shaw, who plays Artemis Fowl II, I really enjoyed the kid. I thought that they did a good job with the casting of Artemis. I thought that he was just likable enough, but at the same time, he has the arrogance of a 12-year-old who knows everything and really is the smartest person in the room almost every single time. And so there's a fine line you have to walk with that. And I thought that he did a pretty good job. And I felt bad for him after having read the book, because I just feel like the characterization there is slightly more interesting for him, because I think the one thing that they really do here in many ways is it does feel kind of cliched his storyline of this connection with the father, you know, and like really, and not that I dislike that. I always enjoy a good like father-son story, but I felt like they were playing too heavily on that cliche and not giving us enough emotion to be invested in it. And therefore, you know, I like the kid as the actor here as Artemis, but it never transcends beyond that kind of like, I would have to say like that kitschy level, you know, like he never gets to play more. I mean, the parts I like the most of him are when he's truly coming into his own about being this criminal mastermind, you know, and formulating these plans and all that. That's the stuff that I think he really excelled at. And if they had stuck to the story of the book, he would have gotten to do that the whole time, honestly.
I wish that we had gotten then the Artemis that you saw in the book, because I don't think at all that it has anything to do with the actor Ferdia Shaw. I think that it was completely with the screenplay writing, and possibly even Branagh's direction, because to me it felt so easy for him. I think that the character in general as portrayed in the movie seems like he is all powerful and that he just is never in any danger, like I said before, and that he knows everything and that he doesn't have any kind of real nemesis. They tell you who his nemesis is supposed to be, but they never really fight it out or anything. And, you know, I mean, the one dangerous situation he was in with the troll, it didn't really feel like a big deal for Artemis, at least anyway, to me. And so all of that combined made me not enjoy him as much, even though I know he's kind of designed as an anti-hero anyway. I just feel like they tell you over and over in the dialogue that he's a criminal mastermind, but I'm not seeing that. And I'm not seeing what supposedly makes him so smart, other than him thinking he's smart, which seems like he's just a jerk.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because, you know, I got the feeling like in the movie they're basically trying to make him Sherlock Holmes, you know, in many ways. And yes, I think, you know, the problem here is that we saddled him with this story to which he has the criminal like mastermind idea thrust upon him, you know, throughout the movie, in the sense that he has to become that instead of just starting him being that.
Right.
You know, which is what the book does, which I think is really smart. And then you begin to unpack that. And you kind of see that there are different layers to this kid, and we just never really get those layers at all here in the movie. And I think, like, I enjoy the casting, but again, I think you're absolutely right. It's just we also are flying through the movie, and so we don't really get to stop and spend time with any of the characters enough to truly feel like we're getting a moment with them, you know, that really matters. It's like it just keeps hopping, and we just don't get that chance, you know? So
yeah. And you're definitely right too about his relationship with his father. I think that they do, in the few scenes that you see of them interacting together, they're trying to give you that feeling that the two of them are very connected emotionally, since he doesn't have his mom, or, you know, the father doesn't have his wife anymore. But they do lean too much, even in those few scenes, into the classic cliche of my dad's never around. And so it's just, right. Kid is annoyed with his dad, and dad feels guilty, but feels like he can't change his ways because he has a responsibility, and that's all you get. And so that also kind of makes you feel sad that you're not getting more.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. So, you know, it's interesting because I really enjoyed Laura McDonald as she does a good job, I think, with the Holly character, and I think her playing Holly Short is really fun. But again, one of the things that's really interesting is that Holly in the book is described as somebody that has. It's really interesting. She's designed as having nut brown skin with auburn hair. So,
which is not at all this actress.
Right. You can obviously, obviously nuts are a variety of different color, so.
But they said
it does
brown.
Say dark nut brown.
All right.
So you get the feeling like, she's probably somebody who's, black, honestly,
or Hispanic or Native American or something.
Exactly. Puerto Rican, almost, any of those wonderful, and so I was really interested that they went this route. And again, I don't dislike the character here. But another thing that they add to the story is this storyline for her father having been somebody who was on the police force and is seen as a traitor. Mm-hmm. And, she's saddled with that storyline of having to prove herself on the force, but her dad, and that's completely different in the book too, because actually in the book, she's the first female police officer for fairies. She's a test case, which is really interesting. And so, and that's a whole other, it could have been a whole other issue if they had gone that direction with the movie. Yeah. So it's just fascinating to me that with the casting with her. And again, I think it's more interesting to me to allow her to have her own storyline instead of here. I feel like in the movie, they kind of saddle her with a cliche storyline that doesn't allow it to be as much about her as it is about something else somebody did that's affecting her, right? Yeah. And so I think that's kind of a mistake, regardless of just the casting choice, which I think she did she was good in the role. But it just doesn't feel like the storyline is all that it could have been for her if they had not given her that storyline. Right.
It's just about everyone else around her and not truly her in control of her own destiny kind of situation. It's just trying to clear her father's name and get the Oculus back. So, yeah, I agree. I wish she had gotten more.
Me too. And I think this is another thing that so they chose with Josh Gad's character to have him portray the dwarf as a Dwarfus Galacticus, which is just a really large dwarf.
Wait, was it Giganticus?
Giganticus, whatever. Galacticus, Giganticus.
He's a galactic dwarf.
Yeah, he's a galactic dwarf. My bad.
It's okay.
But so that's not something that's a part of the book at all. He's just a normal dwarf. Yeah, he's larger than a normal sized dwarf. And honestly, that part just kind of annoyed me in the movie. And otherwise, his character was okay, but everything else about him is normal in the book, in the sense of that dwarves can do that thing where they can unhinge their jaw and they can, but just the whole all of that was just, reading it is one thing, but actually seeing that happen was just really creepy and disturbing on all levels.
Well, and before we even get to that part, I was going to ask if you noticed he changed his voice.
Yeah, that he lowered the register of his voice so that he had that kind of that really husky sound, which I thought worked much better. I'm glad he did. I think it helped with I thought it would helped with the characterization, because I wouldn't have bought it as much if he was just basically Olaf.
Right. And I recognize why he did it, but I think that if they wanted it to go that route, maybe they should have just made a different casting choice. Sorry, I love Josh Gad, but it sounded too unnatural to me. I could tell all the time that it would be me coming in and going, Yeah, I'm Mulch Diggums.
So you didn't like his basically Batman voice?
No.
Where's the trigger? Where is it?
Holly.
I can see what you're saying. What you're saying. And honestly, you know, there's a lot of people they could have chosen to play this role.
Christian Bale. I'm just kidding.
But yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. The character's fine, and they make a much bigger deal of him again in the movie than he is in the book. Mm-hmm. And so again, I keep referring to that, but it's hard not to because I wanted to have some context. But even as the movie, like his character, because they start the movie with him telling the story, right? Mm-hmm. And make him so kind of key to this. I think they overemphasize his character to the point where it's like he doesn't really ever pay off in the way that you would want him to have that big of a role. Like, there's a reason in the book he has a smaller role, and I don't think here in the movie it really legitimizes. And the only reason it is because they cast Josh Gad. That's why he has a bigger role, not because of the story.
No, I agree. I think it's because they liked his performance in Beauty and the Beast and in Frozen and Frozen 2, that they wanted him to be a big part of another Disney movie, and that's why his character had so much of a role in this film. But I think that it could have been left to another character to be the narrator and then had him appear as his token role later when they needed him, instead of having him be like he was going to be this huge piece of the story, and he's not actually that integral to moving the plot.
Yeah, he's not. Which is also the same thing that I kind of felt about the character of Juliet, the little girl, when they're like, who to help a 12-year-old other than a 12-year-old? But she never pays off in the story. Like, they
she's
never really
supposed to protect him, and she doesn't fight.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things in the movie. Like, they introduce her as a character for a specific reason, and then they never pay her off as a character. So they almost would have been better not having introduced her at all. Yeah. And I know why they do, because she is actually an important character in the book that you would want to make sure is introduced. But they never, again, and part of this is because of the allotted time of the movie. There just isn't enough time to spend with her and her character at all.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't see any reason why they would have kept it this short either.
Yeah, I don't know.
Editing? But yeah, I think they introduce her as she knows all these different martial arts things, and she's here to protect Artemis, and then she literally does nothing other than stand in the background and scream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, it would have been better to just leave her out of the movie if you were going to do her like that.
Well, and the guy who plays her uncle, Dom, the butler, I love him because he's, he was in Game of Thrones. He's the quote unquote richest man in Karth. And so that was fun to see him in something else. But I thought it was interesting again, in the book, he's described as being Eurasian. So very interesting choice to make him black in this, which I don't necessarily have a problem with. But it could also be seen as like, having a manservant be black. I mean, that could be a problem.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely one of the criticisms I saw of the movie. A lot of people felt that way.
Exactly. Now, I think, if the actor himself has no problem playing the role, that's fine to me. So, I mean, every actor has the choice to whether they want to play a role or not. So, I don't have an issue with that if they don't have an issue with that. And I thought he was fun in the role. I like him as an actor, and I thought he was enjoyable as the character. So, I love when they were listing all the things he's done to keep himself in shape and whatnot, and then they list like his being at the Gold's Gym and like 84 or something, and that's funny. But yeah, I feel like another place where a prologue really kind of wouldn't have helped all the world building was this place of why this man is so devoted to this family.
Right.
And there's a lot more to that, and they just never truly really go into all of that, and I think it would have helped. And I don't know, again, why, like you asked the question, like, why is this movie so short? I don't know.
You don't?
So it just, I don't. I could ask Kenneth Branagh. I've got him in speed dial. Hold on.
Yeah.
He's not answering. But it's a strange choice to me. Again, like I feel like, kids' movies can be 2 hours, and there's no reason if you're going to make a book, So, gotta say, I mean, I love the choice of having an Irish person like Colin Farrell play Artemis Fowl the first. I think he's perfect casting for that. And it's just fascinating to me that because I know the second book has more to do with the search for his father, so they said they were combining books 1 and 2 in many ways, and so. And I know why. I mean, obviously, they want Colin Farrell's name, but I feel like this story with his father, and then the overall story with that he's involved with the Oculus, I feel like that really detracts from the rest. I mean, they make all of this up for this movie, and it kind of detracts from the very essence of what Artemis Fowl is as a story, as it was written, and it puts a whole other layer on things, at least with this first movie, that I just feel like didn't need to be there, because it affects the storyline for Artemis, the son. It affects the storyline for Holly, and honestly, it makes so much of this movie about Colin Farrell's character, Artemis Sr., with his fight against this character, Opal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But all of the things around him, I think, impact the story negatively, in the sense that they just detract from what the story should be, which is what was written, honestly. And here, I think they never truly really pay off that well, because, his storyline there with this nemesis and why they're after this Oculus and stuff, just, one, it feels cliched, and two, it hurts the rest of the storylines.
I think we're going to be on the same page a lot. I agree. I think that they really could have focused more on the building of the relationship between the father and son, and not had everything be about Artemis Sr., because it does feel like it's just him stepping into his father's shoes all the time, and that it's not really that Artemis Jr.'s story, that it becomes all about, well, your father did this, your father did that, blah, 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 blah. And, he's just kind of a pawn to further do the things that his father was doing. And so, yeah, it's just a little, once again, cliche.
Absolutely. And I think, part of what you're saying is, like, there isn't the buildup either, right? Like, you don't have the buildup for that character so in the book, they plant the seed for the thing about the father, but that's not the overriding story. It's just a seed that's planted that he's been missing, and it has an impact on, Artemis's mother and everything, but it doesn't impact the entire structure of the rest of the story, especially when it comes to the main character, Artemis, which the movie's called Artemis Fowl. Not about the senior, it's about the kid, and so, I think you're absolutely right. It just doesn't work the way it should. And then, I love Judi Dench, and I think she's great. Yes. But it was so weird to have her be playing this Commander Julius Root. I have no idea. I don't care that they gender changed the character from the book, which in the book is a man, which is fine to me. But it just kind of seemed weird that basically she's just M. As an elf.
100%. Yeah, it feels like, even kind of combined with the traditional story of a police precinct, where she's like, I'm going to have your badge for this. Give me your badge and your gun. But I think that it helps a little because it's Judi Dench and she's so good at playing this kind of role.
Yeah.
It made it a little more palatable. But in general, it's a boring character. I mean, her only purpose in the movie version, at least, is the couple of scenes where she is getting on to people.
Right.
And you don't know how she got into that position or why she's arguing with this other guy that's working for Cowboy. Mm-hmm. And I mean, once again, like, not a lot of background information on the motivations for the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And, I think the way that they play it here is a little bit strange because they're insinuating so many things right throughout the movie kind of about this character and who she is, and like
the fairies don't negotiate.
That she knows a lot of things too and all. But the problem is, I think, is that it's just too much. Like they're they're trying to insinuate too many things through all of these characters and through all of this story. They're trying to cram too much in, and this is definitely a place where it's like you have a great actress, and then you just they aren't able to. It feels like really focus on any one thing because you're trying to have them do too much, and so then it just kind of makes it less important, and it leaves you feeling like you don't know what to focus on with the character. And with the Judi Dench as the character, really you that shouldn't be the issue. It should be just like you give her this and then she runs with it, right? And so I think to put a topper on all of this, this whole idea of like this lurking in the shadows is Opal Kobai, who is the nemesis for Artemis Fowl Sr., who is as an elf, apparently, who is after this Oculus. And he has worked, Artemis Fowl Sr. had worked with Holly's father to steal this Oculus and keep it out of this character's, nefarious hands. But this is the part of the movie that absolutely does not pay off whatsoever.
Nope.
Because I don't know enough really about the Oculus until about midway through the movie, but I don't know anything about this character, and they never do anything to really explain much about this villain, and so and the fact that that they're the ones that are holding his father and everything. I know they're trying to connect that, but it really just doesn't work, and it feels like what it feels like is that they kind of like at the end of the movie they almost place these scenes later,
like in post.
We'll
fix it in post.
Yeah. So because it just doesn't really feel connected with the rest of the story, and this is a place where, as I was talking about, because you added in Colin Farrell as the father, and you had this whole storyline that was really connected to him, and like that whole thing, Opal is a connection with that completely drags away from the rest of what's going on, and the why of the story. It just becomes really muddy and messy in that sense. So, I think it's a real misfire on that part right there.
Exactly. This was my biggest complaint of the whole movie, because you have to have stakes to make the plot interesting and make you care and worry about your characters and your hero especially. And you don't feel that here. And it's mostly because of the writing of Opal. And in the movie, I've never noticed them even mentioning that the villain had a name. I read about it after. And they don't explain where this lair is, supposedly, that she's keeping the father, or why she's got other people locked up in there. They briefly have in her dialogue her state her reasons for doing everything, but there's no other information given on her upbringing, why she's so angry and wants fairykind to rule the earth instead of humans.
Right.
So you, once again, don't really care and feel like she's no threat at all, or even has any sympathizers. It seems like it's just her going to do all this on her own.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, so that whole idea of like because there's a slightly interesting theme here, because this Oculus has this power that is a massive amount of power, and it should only be used by the wisest of elves, and it's super dangerous, and it's meant to be basically something that's life-giving, and instead of something that's be used selfishly. And you can tell, this character wants it for selfish purposes and selfish reasons, and so all that's good, but there's just so little development of this storyline in a way that makes much sense, other than absolute clichédom. Like, it's just like, I think that's just not good. And again, this part feels like we added this into the movie later, and it really muddied the waters, I think it would have just been so much better if they had excised this part of the story and found a different way to write the story, found a different way to bring this all together. And I think they could have, by sticking closer, honestly, to the source material. But even with that, I mean, there are ways, I believe, to have written this part better. And if you wanted this character to be in the film, the best thing to have done would have been to, as we mentioned earlier, if you added 30 more minutes to this movie, you could have adequately worked in this storyline in a way that made much more sense to the rest of the film. You absolutely could have done that. You just hamstrung yourself by not allowing us to really spend time with these characters and the plot points, and that's the most important thing, right? It's like character. We need to be able to feel the characters and what their story is, and get invested with them, and then you can really start developing plot, right? But you want plot to be driven by characters, and here plot is driven by plot.
Right. This needs to happen, so we're going to insert it whether it makes sense or not. Yeah, pretty much. I do have to say, one of the things, Christy, that I really, though, enjoyed about the movie, I'm not always the biggest fan of Patrick Doyle as a composer. He's not my favorite, but I felt like his use of the Irish violin sounds for this, and he created, I thought, a really beautiful theme. So I really enjoyed that about the movie. And it was enjoyable enough for me to, I've enjoyed listening to it over the last few days, and really liking it. It created, especially at the very end, they kind of play the theme over them, leaving all together, and it's really beautiful, and it kind of creates a theme that would be perfect for, a series of movies. I don't know if that'll happen, but, the music here, at least, I felt like was good. The music I cannot fault at all. It was really good. I actually reminded me, the theme, especially at the end, kind of reminded me of the ending scene of the first Jurassic Park movie, and using the theme there. Maybe that was an inspiration.
Yeah, that's a good thought.
But yeah, it just felt really natural and emotional in the places where it should, and especially there made you hopeful. And it kind of made me wish that they had done some things better in the rest of the movie to make me interested in seeing another one. But yeah, the music was great.
That's a great point. And I think you're absolutely right. There are parts where the music helps you feel the feelings you're supposed to be feeling. And if the writing had been better, you truly would have been feeling that, because everything would have been working in concert together. And the music was doing its job, but the rest of the writing wasn't. And so, yeah, that's, I mean...
Well, and I wondered, too, if part of the issue with the writing, and maybe I'm wrong, but I noticed that the two writers had worked on theater, but not as much on film. So I'm wondering if they were writing more with the playwright mindset than film.
That's a good pull. I don't know. I mean, I had not researched the writers in that way, but it possibly could be. And I think, I think what kind of shows is that, when you're adapting something from a book, one of the things I remember when, with the Lord of the Rings series, as they were adapting that, they said the closer we got to Tolkien, the better. When they had a question, they would go back to Tolkien, and so many times they just realized, no, we just need to do it like he did, because he knew what he was doing, right? And I think, the author here really knew what he was doing with the story he created. Obviously, it's his story. And I think the movie just tries to do too many things and is then brought down in many ways because of that. And so, I'm really interested to see where you go with your ratings.
Do we want to do out of 5 or out of 10?
Well, let's do out of 5.
I think we usually have been doing out of 5 now. So I will say I'm going to give it some credit where credit is due with the things we mentioned, like the music and the beginning premise that it came from with the source material. I was really excited for. I think that it just, in the film in particular, there were these big points that you can't ignore were done badly. And I have to add also with the CG, the special effects and everything sometimes looked pretty bad, especially for coming out in 2020. You're like, come on. So I don't know if that was a budget thing or what, but it was bad. And so I have to say for out of 5, I would give this a 1.5 stars out of 5 because there was just that much that really bothered me about it, and it's not probably something I would go back and watch again because it just feels so blah.
Wow, that's crazy. And I can't fault you at all for, rating it that way. I mean, I absolutely can't. I think, I initially, when we finished watching the movie, I turned to my wife and I said, oh, that was cute. And then, the more I've thought about it, the more we've talked about it. So I originally had rated it 3.5 stars.
Oh.
I know. And then the more I thought about it, I rated it 3.
Okay.
And after this conversation, I'm going to give it a 2.5 because I think it's a completely mixed bag. And part of that is that I think the idea for this is fun. I think the casting, for the most part, if you've given them more to work with, I think it would have been great. I think all the things we talked about where we thought, as we were criticizing, we were finding some ways to make it better, mainly just by making the movie longer. So you could allow this plot to breathe and give us more time with the characters. And I think you do that, it could have been good. But yeah, this is really half like a good movie. Like, it has some of the foundations to be good, but it just never can get anywhere. And I think you rightly called out, and I was disappointed too. I did feel like they had basically I don't know if they cut the budget for the CGI effects, but you really do want the effects in this kind of movie to work. And sometimes they were kind of cool, and then sometimes they just looked really cartoony. Mm-hmm. And, if you're going to trying to create a believable world for these characters to exist in, you don't want it to feel like a cartoon unless you're just making a cartoon.
Right.
So, honestly, I think this might have made a good, PG-rated cartoon based off the actual book in the sense of going with that story. So,
right.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? I watched it on Disney Plus, which I already pay for, and so it was a decently entertaining hour and a half. But the more I've thought about the movie, the less that I have liked it. And then it didn't help that I read the book. So, Christy, I think it's time, though, before we get out of here, to give everybody some recommendations.
Sure. I actually, it's interesting. I got pulled back into some anime recently, and it's funny because I'm not usually an anime fan at all. But I've heard over and over from a bunch of friends about one in particular, and it's called Attack on Titan. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
But actually, I think our friend Aaron Goins watches it. But it, I believe it's on Amazon Prime, maybe. I'm not sure where we were watching it, but my husband got me to check it out, and the animation is incredible. It's been actually in some exhibitions even. A friend of mine got to see in Japan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But it mainly, the story focuses on this kid and his sibling who are going through the end of the world, but it's like their village always had a protective wall around it to protect them from this evil that they didn't know exactly what it was. But like their parents knew, they just were trying to protect them by not giving them all the information. And then they find out, because everything starts up again, it's basically these giants that eat people. And thankfully, because it's animation, it's not as horrible as maybe it could have been, but it's still pretty, I would say, on the violent end. But I think that the cool thing about it is, although it's this post-apocalyptic thing with monsters, it is focusing on how the people are dealing with the issue. Sort of like the same way that Walking Dead was designed. The story is not about the zombies, it's actually about the people. And endurance and resilience through insurmountable odds, seemingly.
Cool.
And for me personally, it got a little too dark at some point, so I stopped for now. But the story was so interesting, I'm thinking about picking it back up again.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool. I think, honestly, if you were listening to the podcast, you probably have an idea of what I'm going to recommend. And I'm just going to recommend, instead of watching Artemis Fowl, you go read Artemis Fowl.
There you go.
The book was fun. And, I was intrigued enough to think about, I probably will every once in a while just pick up another one of the books and read them. It's really quick. Obviously, I mean, it's a kid's book. So it probably took me 2.5 hours to read.
Oh, wow.
So,
yeah, that's not bad.
It's like 160 pages, so, but, it was, I enjoyed the book, and so, I would highly encourage anybody to check it out, because it was a lot of fun. So, but Christy, if anybody wants to catch up with you there online, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at Bespin Bell. And then I do a couple of other shows aside from 602 Club. I'm also on Sabers and Spells with my friend Teresa, talking about Star Wars, Harry Potter, Stranger Things, all kinds of cool stuff. And then I do a show called Planet Leia on the Fantatrax Network once a month with 5 other women from around the world talking about Star Wars. So I hope you'll check those out.
Awesome. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero under the name MattRushing02. I'm also here on the network doing The Orb with Chris Jones. When we get a chance, we record and we talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing 2 shows. One is called Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, as we're talking about Star Wars every week, which is really fun. So hope you'll check that out. And as I mentioned earlier, I do Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, and every week we are walking through one of the chapters of the Harry Potter series. And as I mentioned, we are already almost done with the series now at this point, even though we've got a ways to go because we are in the Deathly Hallows. So I hope that you will check that out. So well, thank you everyone so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?
Thank you.